welcome to the Salty Briefing podcast. I am so excited because this week we have filmmaker Jon Long, who created an amazing film, which is on YouTube right now, but not for long. So you have to watch it right now because it's coming down on January 20th off of YouTube. The film is called Fight Like Hell, and it's effectively a document about January 6th. 2021, but not just the events of what happened on January 6th itself, but also the events leading up to January 6th with Roger Stone, Ali Alexander, and all of these people who created a movement, basically a religious movement, on behalf of Donald Trump. The movie is incredible. If you're a Republican, you should watch it and let me know what you think. If you are a Democrat, you should watch it and also let me know what you think. It is so relevant to how Donald Trump won 4 years later, and it is so relevant to what's going on right now. It is a must-see film. You will be outraged, you will be depressed, maybe some of you will be inspired, but regardless of your political leanings, I cannot describe to you how important this movie is and how much you should go to YouTube right now. Fight Like Hell, the movie. Watch it. Let me know what you think. Coming up next, Jon Long, the filmmaker who created Fight Like Hell. Jon Long, welcome to the Salty Briefing, part of the Saltier Politics network. I'm so happy to have you here, especially in advance of President Trump's inauguration, because on the very first day, he promised that he will release what he calls the January 6 hostages. And you created what I think is just a seminal record of not just January 6, 2021 and what happened that day, but also everything leading up to it, which, if you don't know, and I didn't know, kind of sets the stage for so much of not just that day, but so much of the next 4 years and so much of how we got here. So I want to talk to you about your movie. But before that, I want to ask you, you're Canadian. How is it that you decided to do something with January 6th? How did you get embedded with people like Ali Alexander and other leaders of the January 6th movement?
Well, I actually wasn't embedded with Ali Alexander, but like many people around the world, we were completely transfixed on what's happening in the US and US politics. So I started really obsessing about what was happening in the lead up to the 2016 campaign. So even like a year before in 2015, and following it like daily. So many people around the world are following that. And as a filmmaker, I like to, sometimes go to places where I see a cultural moment happening. So, for example, I went to DC for the March for Our Lives. And, when after the George Floyd incident and all of the BLM protests, I'm watching that during COVID on TV, this amazing imagery, crazy imagery. I just wanted to be in those places, capturing that imagery as a filmmaker, as a journalist. I had planned to go initially. I wasn't planning to make a movie, but I had planned initially to go to DC on election day, just to capture what was happening on that day, just out of pure curiosity. But I was busy working on other projects. I again wanted to go during the first MAGA March, which was in November. There was another MAGA March in DC in December. And again, I was just busy. So then when his tweet came out on December 19th, Will Be Wild, I thought, okay, we gotta just go there and capture this. Because I was in Canada and we had such a crazy COVID restrictions, I decided not to go. So I hired some camera crews, people that I work with. And we work with, doing like films and TV spots and work with really high-end gear. So I hired some really good camera people. One of them was an Army combat cinematographer. And we went there for the week and the rest is history. So it wasn't a plan. It was more of an accident. And then over a year and a half later, we decided, what are we going to do with this footage? Started putting it together, and I started collaborating with my co-writer, Ford Fisher, because we wanted to like you'd mentioned, the lead up to January 6th. We wanted to tell that story as well, because it really started the day after Election Day. The Stop the Steal movement started with Ali Alexander and a number of different people. And my co-writer Ford was actually around the country and hiring freelancers around the country to document that. So that's the thing that really makes this different, and that was not really covered much in the mainstream media. This incredible amount of planning and this huge movement that led to January 6th. A lot of people think, oh, this was a spontaneous event that happened, and there's all this discussion around that. But it was actually a very coordinated movement of people that was not being covered very well by the media.
I think that's such an excellent point because, I watched this movie and I watched it in horror, but I watched it in horror not for the reasons that you might think. I watched it in horror as somebody who is in politics, um, and whose job it is to get people elected on the Democratic side, that how unprepared and unaware I was. And I assume 99% of people who do what I do for a living were, and potentially even people in the White House, in the current White House, and certainly people in law enforcement and national security, about the fact that this, as you point out, is not a spontaneous uprising. It's not just a bunch of guys showed up on January 6th that decided to storm the Capitol, that this goes back years. I mean, the Stop the Steal movement, yes, was, as you said, after the election, in 2020, but the Ali Alexanders of the world, and I want you to talk a little bit about him, as one of the leaders here, but not just Ali Alexander, Roger Stone, whom I know slightly. All of these people have been creating this almost apocalyptic fight.
Mhm.
And what struck me about your movie was that these people don't think of this in terms of one election. They
Mhm.
think of this in terms of the fight between good and evil. And they think about this in
Mhm.
terms of life or death in ways
Mhm.
that I think the rest of us don't. And when you have that kind of paradigm, when somebody says this is truly a fight between, I think the quote was Jesus Christ and Satan, and Jesus Christ is embodied in Donald Trump, and Satan is embodied in Joe Biden, that this becomes much more than just an election or just more than just one day on January 6th. And this was a movement that they had been planning for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean that very much captures the rhetoric and in all these rallies and speeches what they were talking about. And Roger Stone had coined that phrase, I believe it was in 2016, in preparation for an election they didn't lose against Hillary. And then in 2020, the torch of the so-called brand Stop the Steal was essentially passed to Ali Alexander, and he became the main organizer for the Stop the Steal movement. So there was a lot of other people, involved as well. But he was doing like a daily podcast that was broadcast on Twitter. And so he was organizing, telling people where we're going to go. There was these events that were happening, starting on November 4th, the day after the election, and all the way to January 6th, all around the country, caravans with Alex Jones, the big events in DC. And pretty much that rhetoric that you're talking about is what was leading the narrative all the way through. This is a fight between good and bad, good and evil, and fighting for the values of Jesus Christ.
Who is Ali Alexander? Because Roger Stone is somebody who's been around politics going back to, even before the Nixon era, very well known, has worked on, hundreds of campaigns. So Roger Stone is kind of, to me, a known quantity, somebody who's been around politics for 30 years. Who is Ali Alexander? Because he's such a fascinating figure to me. Here's a person of color who's hanging around with white supremacists, talking about restoring, some of these people restoring the white race, and you have Nick Fuentes and all these other, um, really a combination of these apocalyptic Jesus wants me to do this people slash white supremacists. And here's Al Alexander. I think he's black. I couldn't really tell.
Mhm.
He's a
Yeah.
certainly color. Where did he come from, and how did Roger Stone pass the torch to somebody like that? Who is he?
He has been a political operative in the Republican movement for a long time, for I think it was 14 years leading up to that. So he was an organizer, very involved in politics. At one point, I think he wanted to be a minister, which played into his worldview. So he was just always very involved in that, and then he just became the lead organizer. I think in a sense maybe self-appointed. But he was, a charismatic person. He was very dedicated in communicating to people on a daily basis and was able to rally people to events all around the country leading up to January 6th.
And what's fascinating to me about him also is that there's this quote from the movie Fight Like Hell, where he's speaking, and he's basically saying that Donald Trump, and this is after Trump lost, uh,
Mhm.
will be back in the White House. And he's going to be back in the White House on January 20th, 2021. And if not then he'll be back in the White House by hook or crook, effectively. I'm paraphrasing,
Mhm.
but that was the point. And you know what? They succeeded.
Yeah.
What's so fascinating to me is that this isn't just a bunch of conspiracy theorists standing around talking about the restoration. They had a plan, they worked that plan, and to some extent, they worked that plan past January 6th, past one of the darkest days in this country, past Trump effectively being persona non grata for a very short period of time, but the people of the establishment Republican Party, like Mitch McConnell, even Lindsey Graham, said that it was done with Trump. And yet these people never wavered, and they had a plan, and they executed it. And you know, that's why I found this movie so startling, and I found it so necessary, that I want people on both sides of the aisle to watch, but especially people who are trying to figure out a way back from the abyss on the Democratic side, because it's not a partisan movie. You let these people speak for themselves. There's no commentary, there's no judgment. You just record what they say. And what they say is actually fascinating because they do have a plan to get back
Yeah.
in. And they did it. They couldn't do it with violence, so they did it in the way that they did it afterwards. But this is a movement that's not going away at all.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of the in the speeches you hear. So Ali Alexander was collaborating, and at a lot of these rallies with Alex Jones and Nick Fuentes, and like you say, there's all these conspiracy theories and stuff like that. But you're right; they never wavered, even after January 6th, they continued. Whereas almost everybody else, even Republicans at least on January 6th and maybe part of January 7th, there was a transformation. There was unity. People came together as one on that day, at the end of the day. Um, and then, you hear the speeches with Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham in the chamber. Um, and then the next day, Lindsey Graham's leaving DC at the airport, and a bunch of people attack him in the airport, and then he changes. He's back. You know, Kevin McCarthy's at Mar-a-Lago, whatever, a week or two later, and it just starts, you know, going back to the way the unity is, and that transformation is lost, and then that brings us, to where we are today. But they were all working the main organizers and communicators that weren't really being covered, like the speeches that Nick Fuentes and Alex Jones and Ali and so many others gave at these rallies in plain sight with thousands of people around. You couldn't see those. So, you know, I think what this film does is it more just lands you in those moments. It's more like an immersive experience, an observational, almost like a fly on the wall. We don't do any interviews with people to tell you their opinions about what you're looking at or what they think or what happened or what's going to happen. It's all on the ground in the moment. And we felt that that was the best way to try to tell this story, because there's been so many films and so much coverage, but it's always coming from, one side or another side, as opposed to just a purely journalistic observational viewpoint. And I mean, some people could look at this film and just have completely different takeaways. Like if you watch this film and you believe the election was stolen, you're seeing a much different film than you might be watching.
Or
And I
it's
think that's, the essence of journalism is that's what you're trying to do and show things in context. And that's the really important part is to show it in context because you could take a little sound bite or a picture, for example. Tucker Carlson might take a picture of a Trump supporter protester walking through the hallways with a police officer in the Capitol, and then talk about that for 20 minutes as it was just a peaceful protest and the police were inviting everybody in. And that's the narrative for the day. But that's just a tiny, that did happen, but that's just a tiny sliver of what happened. So, there was over 100,000 people there that day. Most of them were peaceful protesters, but there was some people who were incredibly violent, as we've all seen the pictures. And being able to see those events unfold in real time, rather than like a 2-second clip, you can see that the how the momentum started. Like some of the shots in this movie are like 2 minutes long, and they refute a lot of these. Like a picture says 1,000 words. They refute a lot of these theories that, oh, that was all Antifa that was starting it, or that was Ray Epps from the FBI who started everything. Like just by looking at what happened in the moment, you can judge for yourself, maybe even better than they would do in a court case. And as we know, today is the anniversary of the Jack Smith report being released, so that all of that work that he did, although it won't go to trial, is being released into the public. So people will have that information. How much they'll pay attention, I don't know. The thing about a film is, in a horrible way, I guess it's entertaining to watch because it's created as a film, so it needs to be something that is compelling to watch. But it really does allow a gateway into what happened for you to form your own opinion, much like they would try to do in a court case. But in a court case, and a lot of times, like we saw in the January 6th hearings, a lot of people didn't tune in because they just said it was a witch hunt. So what's the point in watching?
Yeah, how do you feel? You brought up Jack Smith, and it, you're right that this is not going to trial. And in fact, the way it's being spun now is that this was all a futile effort, and on both sides, right? Democrats are
Yeah.
frustrated that Merrick Garland didn't do this sooner. Republicans are saying, you see, there's nothing to this. People voted for Trump. But what's fascinating to me also is watching this, that over and over again, the leaders of this movement who then engage in horrible violence and threats against Mike Pence and really don't discriminate about which politicians they want to harm. Um,
Mhm.
that they are all saying that this is basically because of Donald Trump, that Trump is telling them to do this. Maybe not literally, but close enough where they're following orders from their point of view. It's kind of that whole, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest kind of line
Mhm.
from Henry II. And it's the same kind of thing where will nobody rid me of this meddlesome Congress which is not certifying this election. And so how do you feel having been a filmmaker and actually seeing the thread from Trump to the Stop the Steal leaders to the rank and file who are pushing this out there that he is walking? I mean, the person
Well,
who
I mean, the whole narrative is quite simple. Before the election, Donald Trump said it's the same thing he said in this election, which is the only way I am going to lose if it's rigged, right? And then in 2020, when he lost, he immediately went like on the election night and said this election was stolen. And he's maintained that narrative up until now. And even most of the Republican parties, if you poll, say that they believe the election was stolen. We haven't seen evidence. Like you hear about evidence, there's all this evidence, and then they make a reference to evidence, but we haven't. Uh, I didn't see the evidence in the making of the film, and since I haven't heard of this irrefutable evidence, um, even when Donald Trump was on Joe Rogan's podcast, he said, I've got all the stuff I can show you. Like, it would take, and he said, well, maybe we can come back and do that. So, I mean, maybe that's in the Jack Smith case, or I don't know, maybe they should put it on a website or whatever. but I haven't seen that evidence.
Create a Google link and dump it. I'd love to see that evidence,
Dump
right?
it, just dump it so we can all see it. So we can, like this film, you can make up your own mind. So, then it just went to, he's not telling people to go and smash cops over the head, but what they're all saying is that they're stealing your country from you, and this election was stolen. So if you look at it from that perspective, if you're a US citizen and you believe
Yeah.
those things, when they consider themselves to be patriotic, then you have to agree. If they truly believe that in their heart, then they are trying to act patriotically, which in any case, in my opinion, doesn't excuse violence, political violence. There's different ways to do these things, or beating on cops, but it does, having a peaceful protest. I mean, there's a woman at the end of the film. Don't want to give up what's happening, but she said she thought that if they people were just there, a million people in silence, it would have been much more effective. And I think she was right about that.
Oh, no question. But what's interesting is that they're all marching, screaming 1776. I mean, this incredible footage of them marching. I don't know if it's Constitution Avenue, but basically down their lips, toward their lips. And the Proud Boys and others, they're chanting 1776. Well, what happened in 1776? There was a violent uprising of
Yeah,
American colonialists against British rule. And so
yeah,
it's not a secret as to what they're saying. And what's so incredible to me is you've got cops lining the street, basically very politely saying, can you please get off the road and go on the sidewalk? And they're very polite and they're saying, yes, we will. And they do. But yeah, they're chanting 1776, which again implies a revolution. And a revolution is always bathed, there's, I guess, some revolutions that were peaceful, but this American Revolution was not peaceful in 1776. It was bathed in blood. And that's what they're subscribing to. And it's this kind of very interesting moment to me, again, as somebody who has engaged in politics, that this is a righteous cause for them in ways that I think most campaigns are not. Most campaigns, okay, you vote for candidate X because you like him or her better than candidate Y. This is a mission from God to them. And how do you contest that when people are true believers? I mean,
yeah.
it's very hard to contest people's faith because faith is not predicated on facts. Faith is predicated
Mhm.
on faith. And facts don't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter if somebody showed them literally every single vote that was tallied in every single precinct in this country, because it's not about facts, it's about faith to them. And I think that is a very difficult thing to combat. And this movie to me really hit it home that this is not so much a movie just about a moment in time, but it's really a movie about where the United States is today. And it's fascinating to me that it took somebody who's not in it in this country the way that I think American citizens are to come in from the outside and really hold up a mirror to where the United States is right now. And effectively, these people are back in power. And having made this film, you're about to watch potentially on January 20th, in a few days, Donald Trump pardoning these people. And what do you make of that as somebody who observed them and created a movie about this?
Well, I think like a really important thing is to not look at the Trump supporters that were there at that day as a monolithic crowd, as a very diverse crowd. So most of the people are there to protest peacefully. So I think part of the problem, and so much division that's happening in the US is because of this labels. It's like you're one side or the other. They don't see the nuance of that. All of these sides are very diverse. So when you refer to all of the people that were there as insurrectionists, it becomes, a problem, and it just makes it more divided. And if you're just more accurate in your terminology or your description, in saying that, peaceful protest is fine, most of the people there were peaceful. The other people who were violent, that would be horrible to see someone who is beating up on police officers be pardoned, in my opinion. That doesn't make sense to me. They're trying to protect their their capital. Um, so a blanket pardon, I don't know, that doesn't seem to make sense. I'm sure like every individual case has its own facts. There could have been people who were swept up in the momentum of what happened and walked into the Capitol, which is very different than someone who picks up a weapon and smashes a police officer over the head. So every case is different. And I know that most of the country is against just this blanket pardon to all the people that he calls hostages.
But the people who he calls hostages are violent people. I mean, the people who are just walking down their lips and protesting peacefully are
Yeah,
not
they're
sitting.
not in jail.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's fascinating to me is that he is actually talking about releasing the people who beat up on cops, so much for bags of blue. Um, and also releasing people who, I mean, these people were not tourists in the Capitol. I used to work in the Capitol, so I can tell you it's very hard to get in there. You have to go through mag
Mhm.
machines. There's a lot of security there. You don't just stroll in for a tour.
Yeah.
There's a visitor center you have to go through. I mean, it's not, you don't break through doors and go to Nancy Pelosi's office uninvited. That's just a crime. I mean, if I were to do that right now, I'd be arrested, and rightly so. And so to me, um, these hostages, as he calls them, are people that you have a film about who maybe did it. And I think you raise an excellent point. Maybe did it for all the right reasons because they truly believe, again, that this is a fight between good and evil. And when you see evil taking place, you've got to do everything possible to stop it. So I'm not suggesting that there are people who are motivated by bad intentions. I think it's important for people to understand where a lot of these people are coming from. Again,
And it's not only good and evil. It's they were told
the
the
election was,
election was stolen. So
but
they thought they were fighting against a corrupt election system.
they were told the election was stolen
That's right.
by Donald Trump. I
They
mean,
were told that. Yeah, they believed that because they were told that.
yeah, to be clear, people in your film, which I think is just remarkable to think about, say that we're here because we are told by Donald Trump to effectively do this. And the movie's called Fight Like Hell for a reason. I mean, Trump says fight like hell. You've got Rudy
Mhm.
Giuliani, who, yeah, I actually think has gotten off the deep end. I think he actually does believe this stuff now. I
Mhm.
don't think that he said, I think there are other people in your film who are cynical and using this for cynical political purposes. But you have
Mhm.
somebody like Rudy Giuliani, who I think clearly has something snapped, who's
Mhm.
standing up there as you portray so well and says, single combat. We got to fight this
Yeah.
with single combat. You see Michael Flynn kind of standing next to him, looking at him like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
But you've got Michael Flynn, who I guess has become a true believer. But I mean, this is somebody who used to be in the highest ranks of intelligence, a general in the United States military, um, who are in touch with Donald Trump every single day. I mean, Rudy was there 24/7. And you have people like that effectively telling the people who are now hostages, as Trump calls them, that the only way to do this is through combat, and to quote Trump, fight like hell. Well, how do you fight like hell when everything else has failed? And it's 1776, and you've asked the king to stop taxing you, and you've asked the king to stop quartering people in your houses, and you've asked the king for more control over your colonies, and the king says no. What do? You go to Lexington and Concord, and you start the battle. You go to Bunker Hill, and the shots are fired.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, it had to result in violence because these people, again, if this is an apocalyptic message from God, and Jesus Christ has now anointed Donald Trump as his messenger on earth, well, of course, you have to go and save your country. And so, to me, it's almost sad after watching this movie that I'm not talking about Stuart Rhodes. I'm not talking about people who really should
Mhm.
know better. But I mean, there are
Yeah.
people who just are sitting in prison now
Mhm.
that are just washed by Trump, who knows full well that this election was not stolen. He's admitted it.
Mhm.
He has no filter. And as you point out, here's Jack Smith submitting a report. We have all the January 6 hearings, and the country's just over it. They're just sick of
Yeah.
it. They've moved on. And he will be, what's also interesting to me is watching them march down their lips with the scaffolding on the west side of the Capitol going up for Joe Biden's inauguration. Well, the same scaffolding is up now on the west side of the Capitol for Donald Trump's inauguration.
Yeah.
They made it happen.
That's why it's so important to see this stuff unfold in context. Like when they use the word fight so much, you can say that in the recent campaign, Kamala's campaign, they use the word fight a lot, right? So you have to see it in context. Like someone can use the word fight and you get a feeling of love, or it's the nuance behind. So really what you need to do is watch in context all of the rhetoric, the speeches. How do you feel when you're hearing these speeches? So for example, on January 5th in Freedom Plaza, there were speeches all day long. So that's maybe a 3 or 4 minute scene in the movie, and you can feel those speeches. How do those speeches make you feel? And you're using the same word fight, but one could be a call to war or violence, and one could be a call to love. So it really comes down to nuance, and you have to see things in context, because when you try to tell stories in sound bites, you can manipulate the audience.
Yeah, I'll tell you how it made me feel. It made me feel that Democrats had no chance in this election. Because as you rightly point out, and this movie just, I keep coming back to this because it's so eye-opening. I just want everybody to see this movie because I want people to understand that this movement is not just limited to January 6th and the days prior to January 6th, that this is a movement that continues. These people feel that there is an imperative from Jesus Christ to go and win elections, regardless of how they do it, or not even to win elections, to put their
They,
stamp on the United States government.
They were saying all of these things 4 years ago. And they're in the film. Listen to Nick Fuente's
Crazy.
speeches in the film
Yeah.
4 years ago, and a podcast with Nick and Ali Alexander and Alex Jones, where Nick essentially talks about, what we need to do is we need to take over the White House, fill it full of people who are 100% loyal to Donald Trump, and it will become the permanent revolution. They were saying it all a long time ago, what's happening.
Yes, and there's a quote from one of them saying, I think it's Nick Fuentes, I'm no longer a Republican. I'm a Trump, I forgot how you put it, but it's something
Trump
like
supporter, yeah.
quarter. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
matter anymore. It's all about
yeah,
Donald Trump. I mean, it's truly, um, I mean, if you kind of know your religious
yeah,
history, it's almost like they're disciples. I mean, and
yeah,
so, and then here you have Kamala Harris is running a conventional campaign, or Joe Biden, or really any Democrat. I'm not blaming the two of them. You could stick, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, whoever comes next in this. And okay, well, I like their policies and I like where they stand and where they're leading the country. I'll vote for them, or maybe I'll just stay home. Like maybe I'm just sick of the whole thing. These people are not staying home. I mean, to them, this is like the second coming.
yeah,
And they were going to win. And the intensity is tremendous. And I know people might say, well, that's just, a few people. It's not huge. It's spreading. It's spreading because it went from being a few thousand people on the ellipse on January 6th to Donald Trump winning the popular vote. And 30%, the statistic is astounding. Something like 32% of the Republican Party believes that the 2020 election was not stolen.
mhm,
That means almost 70% of Republicans believe the Stop the Steal stuff, whether they participated in it or not. So this is not just, your film to me is not just about, again, Alex Jones, which people could say, okay, the guy's a clown, or Nick Fuentes, who's, a self-described incel, and we could all laugh at that, which, I think we shouldn't. We think we should take it seriously, or Ali Alexander, whoever the hell he is, or wherever he came from, some low, not well-known political operative who suddenly just became the face of this whole movement. But it's not, because it's kind of like, speaking of vaccines, I mean, this is like an unvaccinated party where this is just infected a once great party. I don't agree with them, but there used to be two parties in this country that fought over taxes and fought over welfare and that fought over, abortion. But this is much more than that. Your movie really demonstrates what a religious movement this is, with Jesus,
That,
with Jesus Christ replaced in some ways by Donald Trump.
that's the key point. There's a very predominant, white Christian nationalist movement, and it's been, it's not spontaneous. This has been happening for a long time, and that's what drives a lot of the people who were there is that movement.
Yeah, I mean, you have, and I don't want to give the film away. I just, it's actually a really life-changing film. And I don't do many podcasts around films, but this one is so important going forward, not to relitigate, but going forward, I think it's so important. There is a scene in the early part of the movie where you have very casually a bunch of guys standing with, I don't know my assault weapons. So I don't know if it's an AK-40, whatever it
Yeah.
is, just standing around with a bunch of assault weapons, very casually outside the State House in Georgia, trashing Governor Kemp, who's a Republican, for certifying the election. How dare he? And saying that this has to stop. And they're just standing there with these massive assault weapons. And I'm thinking, my God, if you are a member of Congress who is troubled by, for example, Pete Hegseth's record, or troubled by Tulsi Gabbard's record of sucking up to Putin, sucking up to Assad, or Robert Kennedy's record about, if you're Mitch McConnell, who's a polio survivor, his whole anti-vaccine movement, and I can go on about all these different characters that Trump is putting in. But you see a movie like this, and from their perspective, you're thinking, oh my God, I'm just going to say yes to this because I don't want these guys coming after. I mean, these are like brown shirts. This is about personal safety to me as much as it is about a movement, because they will stop at nothing, because they truly believe, as you just pointed out, that you need to have a government that is staffed by whoever Donald Trump wants. I mean, that is an imperative. That's not an optional
Mhm.
step.
Yeah.
And if you're Governor Kemp and you're standing, you're God knows what this guy must think if he were to watch this movie, to see that there are people, just because I guess it's legal in Georgia, just standing around with their assault weapons trashing you. What's the next step if the movie's called Fight Like Hell, right?
Well, I mean, that's the thing that is fascinating to, especially to people outside of the United States. Like in Canada, at this moment in time, we're a very peaceful country, and the thought of someone walking down the street with a assault rifle, you never ever see. Whereas that's embedded in that's normal, like that's legal. So what you're talking about is just if you want to go get an assault rifle, you can just go buy it and walk down the street in America. So, if you live there, that might not be that surprising or a big deal, but where in places where that's not legal, that looks, pretty crazy.
It doesn't make you want to be the 51st state.
No, I don't think, I think we're happy the way we are.
But actually, I do want to ask you about that since we're on the
We have good
subject.
health care, by the way.
Yeah, you guys have good health care. We trash it all the time for some reason, that you guys don't have good health care. I don't know why we do, because I
Yeah,
know you do.
yeah,
You don't have guns. You know,
yeah,
nobody, he might not like Justin Trudeau, but nobody's walking around with guns threatening Justin Trudeau for doing whatever he's
yeah.
doing. You've got poutine in Quebec, which is great. What do you make of all of it? I mean, do you
That's the great equalizer, poutine. That's
think
how we all become one.
I think that's the only thing that you guys are right. But as I guess as a Canadian, what do you make of all this when you have the most powerful country in the world as your neighbor, a country with which you do more trade than anywhere
Mhm,
else, your NATO partner,
mhm,
um, an ally for hundreds of years. We've lived peacefully, we've
mhm.
coexisted. You guys think about us a lot. We don't think about you guys a lot, but which
Yeah,
is probably good for you.
yeah.
Um, And all of a sudden, you've got Trump, sort of joking about making you the 51st state, but kind of like he was joking about Mike Pence and kind of like he was joking about stop this. I mean, every time, he gets busted, it's always a joke, but you made this film. You
Hmm.
know what the jokes, as
Hmm.
all them lead to, and what his supporters, they don't think he's joking.
Yeah.
And so now,
Well, yeah.
now as a Canadian, having made this film, what do you think? Do you think these guys are, I keep thinking about that crazy movie from about 30 years ago that Michael Moore did about the United States
Right.
being Canada.
Yeah,
Um,
it's absurd. You think, oh, that's absolutely absurd. Yeah.
but you've made this film now. You've seen what these guys are capable of. Are you worried?
Um, I'm worried about the disinformation campaign that's headed our way. I mean, Musk has already started. These are very, very powerful forces. Through those forces can, especially with misinformation, can have a big effect on populations, and they're doing it all over the world. So I didn't think in my lifetime that I would ever see a threat like that. I have had conversations that at some point in time, the U.S. is going to there could come to heads because of the water and the energy and that type of stuff. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime, but when he first mentioned that, I took it very seriously. And you need to continue to take it seriously if you're a Canadian, because he didn't just say it once. He's talked about it repeatedly. So, and they're going to start to try to convince Canadians that that's a good idea. So, what's important is for, just for I guess it all really comes down to information, understanding, who you are as a country, what makes your country a great country. In our case, we're a peaceful country. We have great health care. We're prosperous. We have resources. There's just millions of reasons why we're a great country. And then you have to ask the question, what is going to make our lives better? And I guess what they're selling it on is that we'll protect you. And we're like, well, protect us from who?
You guys can protect yourselves. I mean, we have a NATO treaty where we have to protect you anyway. If
Yeah,
someone invades you, and you have to protect us. I mean,
yeah,
the only time that I don't want to get into this too much, but the only time that the Article 5 in NATO was invoked is actually when we got attacked, the United States, and Canada sent military personnel for 20 years to Afghanistan to protect us.
yeah,
So to me, this whole notion of we'll protect you, well, yeah, you damn better protect
yeah,
Canada because we have a treaty to that effect. But again, coming back to your movie, it's not even a question of brainwashing Canadians because hopefully, I have a column coming out called the Maple Anschluss, but like that hopefully will never happen.
mm-hmm.
But you do have this very energized base of people who apparently, if they have no problem storming the Capitol on January 6th because Donald Trump said so, what's to prevent them from, crossing the border and overwhelming? I've crossed the Canadian border. It's like two guys sitting in a hut, in the Vermont Canada, Vermont Canada border. It's not hard to do.
Yeah,
And this movie, I think, kind of illustrates, as I keep saying, it's not just about the events of January 6th, 2021, that he has a personal militia almost that will do what he wants. And I hate Hitler comparisons because
mm,
one Adolf
yeah,
Hitler. I
yeah,
don't want to compare anybody to him except maybe Stalin. But if you look at late 20s, early 30s Germany, it is this personal cult of personality that then creates a personal militia that then overwhelms or subsumes the military. And I think you have a national security team that he's putting in now with Pete Hegseth and others who subscribe to this MAGA movement. Um, and if I were
mm,
an ally of the United States, it seems, especially Canada, our closest ally, it seems to me that based on your movie and everything we've learned from it, that Canadians should not be sleeping well at night. I hate to say this. I mean, it's
Yeah.
painful to say it, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah. I
know,
mean, the question is, I mean, we never heard any of this rhetoric leading up to the election. There was no talk of imperialism or conquering countries. Um, I don't know how his supporters are interpreting this. Like they voted him in for other reasons, to bring prices down, to control the border, to have mass deportations, and these types of things, right? Um, and I haven't heard reporting on how his supporters feel about these conquering these other countries. Like I've heard what Canadians are saying, especially Canadian leadership is saying, but do his supporters just go, "Oh, we're not worried anymore about inflation. We're not worried about tariffs, our prices going up, and we've actually moved the ball, and we're with the administration that we should start taking over these other sovereign countries."
well, I guess one way he's going to sell it is to say we don't need tariffs with Canada. Canada is the 51st state. Um, Canada is not controlling the border, so you've got all sorts of illegal migrants, as he would put it, coming from Canada.
Mm.
I don't think that's accurate, but nevertheless,
Mhm.
he can say it. So, you want to lower prices. Well, Canada's lumber goes into housing and lower housing
Yeah.
prices. All the stuff that, again, we trade with you more than anybody else. So there's a lot of Canadian goods flooding the American market that could lower prices. His argument, if they were American products.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I guess the one thing I take from this movie that I think everybody, again, should watch and take from it is you should take him both literally and seriously, because a lot of people do. And you saw what happened 4 years ago, almost to the day, on January 6th, 2021, um, because those people took him seriously, and just a small fraction of them are sitting in prison right now. And even if you weren't releasing them, there's a whole movement out there that will do whatever he wants. And if we all have to get on, boats
Well,
across lakes to get to Canada, I guess we was. I mean, it's kind of a crazy.
now it's 50% of the country. I mean, the popular vote was pretty close, within a 1 or 2%.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's a massive movement.
It's a massive movement. I don't know that all 48 or 49% of the people who supported him necessarily subscribe to MAGA. I think they were just frustrated, maybe, as we keep talking about the price of eggs.
Yeah.
It's certainly the core of the Republican Party, which is not insignificant, that really does believe this. And as your movie showed so clearly, they're on a mission from God.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is the messenger. And I hope people wake up and realize that, because this is not a fight. This is not a fair fight. I think
Yeah.
this is a fight between true believers and people who vote in elections every year or every couple of
Yeah.
years. Um,
Yeah, I think like what you said earlier, that it's really just a mirror on American culture. This film does that without trying to interject opinions about what you're seeing. And I think that type of, like, when we started making this film, we said we want to try to create pathways for empathy, so that you're not just coming at it from a side, you're just observing what happened. And so in that respect, I think it can maybe inform people, or just have people see them in themselves, see a picture of themselves, whether it's you're a Democrat or a Republican, and just maybe challenge your perspectives about what you're seeing. And I do believe, like the woman at the end of the film says, really, all we just, I think citizens do want to come together. They do have shared values around the things that matter most, which is just being free, being safe, being prosperous, having a shot, having healthcare, having education. Like those are a better world for our kids. Those are the things that we need to talk about and bring people together. Everything else is just divisive. And that's what people are doing now. They're taking those fringe divisive things, and they're turning it into a real live reality TV show and pitting everybody against each other. And that's how you get power.
um, just incredible. The movie It's called Fight Like Hell. It's on YouTube now. I think it's not going to be on YouTube long, right? So you want to watch it this week. Um, uh, and I truly do urge people to watch it because that's how you prepare yourself for the next 4 years and what needs to be done and what you're up against. If you're on the Democratic side, if you are a Republican, I'd be curious to hear from you because this movie, as you said, doesn't point out foibles, it doesn't judge. It just shows what was going on. And some people may think it's really inspirational, and some people may be horrified by what's happened to their party. But I would love to hear from people, especially on the Republican side, who watch this about their views. No judgment, no judgment, because I watched it, and I will tell you, there are people sitting in prison right now who I believe probably should have gotten a waiver for mental reasons. I know that they wouldn't, but these are people who truly believe. They're true believers. I mean, these are disciples in truly the most religious terms. And so I'd be very curious to hear from people about that. Thank you so much for joining the Salty Briefing, and so grateful to you for the movie, which I think is really indispensable. Go to YouTube, Fight Like Hell, watch it. Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much.
Yep.